The first time it happened, it was supposed to be simple. A routine diplomatic briefing. A quiet hall filled with floating holograms, sterile lighting, and representatives from worlds that looked nothing alike but pretended they understood each other perfectly. Humans were still new in this alliance, still treated like enthusiastic guests who had wandered into a conversation too advanced for them. He stood slightly apart from the others, adjusting the slim device resting against his ear. It was the most advanced translation system humanity had ever built. Layers of neural mapping, predictive linguistics, emotional pattern recognition. To him, it felt less like a machine and more like a second mind. Across the hall, she appeared. At first, it wasn't her beauty that struck him. It was the way the room seemed to shift around her, as if gravity itself had quietly decided to pay attention. Her posture was calm but deliberate, her movements precise, her gaze distant yet sharp. She didn't look at anyone for long, and when she did, it felt less like curiosity and more like evaluation. When their eyes met, she didn't smile. She spoke. The sound of her voice was smooth and layered, like multiple tones harmonizing in a way that shouldn't have been possible. For a brief moment, he forgot to activate the translator. Then the device clicked on. "Your species vibrates with unnecessary noise," the translated voice announced in a flat, cheerful tone. He blinked. Around them, diplomats continued their conversations, unaware that something had already gone wrong. He hesitated, then replied carefully, choosing words that felt safe. He spoke about cooperation, curiosity, mutual understanding. The translator relayed his words. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. Then she answered again. "You speak as if emotions are tools. That is adorable," the device translated. He felt heat rise to his face. He tried again, this time explaining that humans didn't see emotions as tools, but as essential parts of existence. He talked about stories, art, laughter, conflict, love. He tried to sound confident, not defensive. She tilted her head slightly. The translator hummed, processed, then spoke. "So you admit your species is ruled by chemical confusion?" He almost laughed. Almost. He glanced at the device, wondering if it was malfunctioning. But the data feed looked stable. The emotional markers were accurate. The problem wasn't the machine. It was her language. He watched her more closely now. When she spoke, her eyes didn't just focus on him. They seemed to measure the space between them, the rhythm of his breathing, the tension in his posture. It was as if she were reading something he couldn't see. He decided to risk honesty. "Maybe," he said softly. "But confusion is how we learn." The translator hesitated longer than usual before delivering her response. "Learning is inefficient when guided by feeling," it said. She looked at him directly then, not with hostility, not with kindness, but with something far more unsettling, certainty. "You will never understand my kind," she added, her voice now bypassing the translator for a brief moment. The words came out in imperfect human tones, as if she had practiced them deliberately. The sentence landed heavier than it should have. He should have walked away. Instead, he stayed. The conversation drifted, but the tension remained like an invisible thread. He found himself noticing details he hadn't before, the subtle change in her gaze when humans laughed nearby, the faint pause she took before responding to emotional expressions, the way her fingers flexed slightly whenever someone mentioned concepts like family or attachment. Later, when the briefing ended and the hall emptied, he found himself alone near the holographic displays, reviewing linguistic data. He didn't notice her approach until she was already standing beside him. This time, she didn't speak immediately. He waited. When she finally did, her voice was quieter. "Your device is inaccurate," she said. He nodded slowly. "It's doing its best." She studied the floating symbols in front of him, her reflection shimmering through layers of light. "Your best," she repeated, as if testing the phrase. He felt a strange urge to explain himself, to defend not just the machine but his entire species. "We built it because we wanted to listen," he said. "We know we don't understand everything. So we try." Her eyes narrowed slightly. The translator activated automatically. Trying is not the same as comprehending, it said. He smiled faintly. True. But it's how comprehension starts. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged. He noticed something odd then. The translator wasn't outputting anything. No emotional markers. No predicted intent. It was as if her words existed in a space the algorithm couldn't reach. She stepped closer, not enough to invade his space, but enough that he could sense her presence clearly. There was no scent he could identify, no warmth he could measure, yet something about her felt intensely real. You humans believe emotions make you superior, she said. He shook his head. Not superior. Just alive. Her gaze lingered on him longer this time. Alive? She echoed, softly. The translator didn't intervene. Something in the air shifted. He realized then that she wasn't just analyzing his words. She was watching how he reacted when misunderstood, how he handled being judged, how he responded to quiet moments. He wondered if she felt anything at all, or if she was simply observing him like an experiment. Before he could ask anything, she turned away, her movements smooth and deliberate. As she walked toward the exit, she paused briefly, without looking back. You speak beautifully, she said, almost to herself. Even when you are wrong. Then she disappeared into the corridor, leaving him alone with the glowing holograms and a translator that suddenly felt far too small. He stood there longer than necessary, replaying every word, every pause, every subtle shift in her tone. Somewhere deep inside him, beneath logic and language and algorithms, something stirred. Not understanding. Not yet. But the unsettling feeling that he had just encountered something far more complicated than any language. And far more dangerous than any misunderstanding. By the next cycle, he realized that not understanding her was becoming a habit. He spent hours buried in linguistic archives, feeding alien phonetics, emotional wave patterns, and cultural metadata into his translation system. The device learned quickly, but the more it learned, the more confused it seemed to become. Her language was not just words, it was rhythm, posture, silence, proximity, and something that felt dangerously close to intention. When he finally encountered her again, it wasn't in a hall of diplomats but in a quieter corridor where artificial stars shimmered across transparent walls. She noticed him instantly. You are still trying, she said. He hesitated. Is that a problem? The translator processed her reply. Persistence is inefficient when the outcome is predetermined. He smiled faintly. Humans disagree with that. She walked beside him without asking permission, matching his pace effortlessly. The corridor lights shifted as they moved, reacting to biometric signals from different species. Around them, other beings passed by, some curious, some indifferent, some openly suspicious. You analyze us like puzzles, he said. She didn't deny it. You analyze us like stories, she replied. He considered that. Stories help us understand meaning. Her gaze sharpened. Meaning is not universal. They stopped near a holographic display of alien constellations. He pointed at one cluster, explaining how humans connected stars into myths and emotions. The translator struggled, outputting awkward interpretations that made her expression tighten. So your species invents emotions where none exist. It translated. He laughed quietly. We invent meaning where none exists. There's a difference. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. Later, he was invited to observe a cultural exchange event between species. He hesitated, knowing she would be there, but curiosity overpowered caution. The chamber was filled with floating artifacts, shifting energy patterns, and representatives demonstrating rituals that meant everything to them and nothing to anyone else. He stood near the edge, adjusting his translator again, when he felt something change in the air. She was there. Not beside him this time, but across the chamber. Their eyes met. Something flickered between them, too fast to define. Moments later, a group of alien scholars approached him, their voices sharp and precise. They questioned him about human emotional models, about why humans reacted unpredictably to stimuli that other species considered trivial. He answered carefully, but he could feel her attention on him. Then it happened. A ripple of energy surged through the chamber. He turned instinctively toward the source and saw her standing near an ancient artifact, an object shaped like interlocking rings of light and metal. She had not touched it, yet it was responding to her presence. Without thinking, he stepped forward. His hand brushed the surface. The world changed. Not dramatically. Not violently. Subtly. The artifact pulsed once, then again, sending waves of light across the chamber. Conversation stopped. Alien scholars froze. Diplomatic drones hovered uncertainly. He felt nothing at first. Then he felt something. Not pain. Not pleasure. Awareness. He looked at her. Her expression had transformed completely. Shock. Fear. And something else he couldn't name. She moved toward him in a blur, gripping his wrist with unexpected force. "You should not have done that," she said, her voice no longer filtered by the translator. Around them, alien voices rose in alarm. Some sounded angry, others terrified. Security fields activated, surrounding the artifact. He pulled his hand back slowly. "I didn't know what it was." Her fingers tightened slightly, then loosened. The translator finally activated again. "You triggered a bonding protocol," it announced far too calmly. He stared at the device. "A what?" Her gaze snapped back to him. For a moment, she looked less like an untouchable alien and more like someone who had just made a catastrophic mistake. "This was not intentional," she said quietly. He nodded. "I believe you." But the chamber had already descended into chaos. Alien officials surrounded them, their voices layered with urgency. Words like ancient, irreversible, and dangerous, repeated in languages the translator struggled to decode. He felt suddenly small. She stepped slightly in front of him, not protectively, not possessively, but instinctively, as if positioning herself between him and something worse. He noticed something strange then. Her breathing. It had changed. Not faster. Not slower. Different. When the officials finally dispersed, leaving the artifact dormant, and the chamber silent again, they stood alone near the edge of the hall. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. He broke the silence first. "So," he said carefully, "is this bad?" She looked at him, then away. "In my culture," she said, "it is considered complicated." The translator hesitated before rendering her next words. "It links two minds at an emotional frequency normally inaccessible to my species." He swallowed. "Does it hurt?" She paused. "No," she said. Then, after a moment, she added something that the translator did not immediately translate. He waited. Finally, the device spoke. "It is distracting." He felt his heart beat a little faster. She studied him again, as if seeing him for the first time rather than analyzing him. "You said humans learn through confusion," she said softly. He nodded. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but not in anger. "Then perhaps," she said, "you should prepare to learn far more than you intended." He watched her walk away, her steps slower than before, less precise. Around him, the interstellar station felt suddenly louder, brighter, and more unstable. He touched his ear, adjusting the translator, but the device offered no explanation for the strange new silence forming in his mind. For the first time since joining the Alliance, he wasn't trying to understand an alien language. He was trying to understand an alien feeling. And the most unsettling part was this. It felt disturbingly human. The days that followed were chaos wrapped in subtlety. He woke each morning not to the usual hum of the station, but to the faint echo of her presence in his mind. Not literal words, not phrases, just feelings. A flicker of impatience here, a pulse of curiosity there, a warmth that shouldn't exist in a species that prized control above all else. He could feel it, and that alone was terrifying, and strangely exhilarating. He tried to carry on with his duties. Meetings with alien delegates, translating communications, cross-cultural seminars. But every interaction felt filtered through an invisible lens. Her judgments, her emotions, the tension between pride and fascination, they hovered over him like a shadow he couldn't shake. And the more he tried to treat her as another diplomatic variable, the more the bond insisted on reminding him that she wasn't another anything. She appeared unexpectedly during one of his routine translation tests. The room was empty except for the holographic displays projecting symbols from her world. He had hoped for a quiet moment, and she had arrived like a storm wrapped in elegance. "You still attempt to quantify what cannot be quantified," she said. Her tone was sharp but curious, and the translator did its best to render nuance. "You are persistent, human. Almost annoyingly so." He smiled faintly. "I like to think humans aren't afraid to fail at understanding things. Failure is just part of the learning process." Her eyes narrowed, studying him with that uncanny precision he had come to both dread and crave. "In my experience," she said, her voice quieter now, "emotions only complicate understanding. They distract. They mislead." He held her gaze. "Or they reveal the truth you've been too proud to admit." There was a pause, and for the first time, he thought he saw a flicker of doubt. Her fingers flexed slightly, a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but his translator caught it as an untranslatable signal of agitation and curiosity. She looked away, blinking at one of the holographic symbols, as if trying to ignore him, as if ignoring him could undo what had been set in motion by that artifact. Over the next few hours, the bond began to assert itself in ways neither of them could fully control. He noticed it when she flinched slightly at a sudden noise, and he felt a corresponding twinge of discomfort, as if their emotional frequencies were now entwined. He noticed it when he laughed quietly at a human idiom, and she flinched again, not mockingly this time, but with what seemed like genuine amusement, though she tried to hide it. Other aliens began to notice too. Whispers spread about the unusual pairing, the human who had touched the artifact, the alien beauty whose eyes seemed to flicker unpredictably when near him. Some looked on with skepticism, others with concern. The rules for bonded pairs were strict, bizarrely formal, and utterly overwhelming. Protocol manuals outlined consequences ranging from ritual reprimand to emotional isolation, a concept that made him shudder because the momentary link had already begun to feel essential. At one point, she cornered him near a section of the station reserved for research simulations. "You will not embarrass yourself with your interpretations of my culture," she said, attempting to reassert control. He grinned, because despite the warning, he couldn't resist. "I'm not interpreting it. I'm observing it. And I notice that every time I fail, you react in ways that are not entirely alien." Her eyes flickered, a flash of exasperation mixed with intrigue. The translator rendered her next words with slight delay. "You are impossible." He laughed, but the sound felt different. Softer, more human, more connected. It was the sound of someone realizing that the rules he had learned for logic and language didn't apply here. That some things, feelings, bonds, unexpected reactions, couldn't be quantified. They began spending more time together, under the guise of protocol and research. She taught him small gestures of her world's etiquette, often correcting him in ways that made him laugh despite himself. He taught her human humor, ridiculous anecdotes, and how to mispronounce words intentionally just to see her reaction. Each interaction was an exercise in chaos, subtle seduction, and mutual discovery. Then came the first incident that forced them both to acknowledge the depth of the bond. A minor emergency in the station, a systems glitch, trapped them together in a maintenance corridor. The walls hummed, lights flickered, and the translators sputtered under the strain. The proximity forced them to move closer, side by side, for safety, yet neither could leave. Her voice, quiet and stripped of pretense, came first. "This proximity is uncomfortable." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "I think it's supposed to be uncomfortable. It's called life." She turned to him, her eyes narrowing, and he saw it again, the small signs of emotional vulnerability she never allowed anyone else to witness. A softening of the jaw, a hesitation before speaking, a subtle pulse in her chest that mirrored his own. The translator flinched at the irregular signals, clearly overwhelmed by what it could not compute. They remained in that corridor until the glitch was resolved, the silence between them dense but alive. He realized then that understanding her wasn't about words or protocols. It was about presence, about attuning oneself to subtlety, about embracing unpredictability. Humans did it naturally. She had spent a lifetime suppressing it. When the doors finally opened and the corridor emptied, she glanced at him with an expression that bordered on curiosity and annoyance. "You are frustratingly human," she said. He smiled, stepping back into the hum of the station. "And you are fascinatingly alien." The bond pulsed gently between them, subtle yet undeniable. Neither could ignore it, either could easily escape it. It was in the way she moved, the way he laughed, the way their glances lingered. And for the first time, he realized that what she had claimed, that he could never understand her, was not a challenge to conquer, but a doorway to something far more complicated. Something dangerous. Something necessary. And somewhere deep in the space between their worlds, he felt the first stirrings of something entirely human: desire, curiosity, and the bold, ridiculous hope that maybe, just maybe, understanding her was not impossible after all. The Alien Council had called an emergency assembly. The chamber was massive, filled with beings from dozens of species, each radiating authority and suspicion. He stood near the center, feeling small, human, absurdly fragile in comparison to the towering, elegant forms around him. She was beside him, though her posture was rigid, a mask of composure that barely contained the storm of emotion flickering in her eyes. "They insist the bond must be severed," she whispered, her voice low but tinged with frustration. "They claim it threatens our evolution, our emotional equilibrium, our very social order." He shook his head. "All because of one accident." She turned her gaze toward him, sharp, almost desperate. "It is not an accident to them. It is corruption. Contamination. You have brought a human flaw into the heart of our culture." He looked around at the assembly. Alien leaders debated in languages his translator strained to keep pace with. The word dangerous, repeated, along with reckless and anomaly. Every phrase pointed toward one conclusion: he would be removed from proximity, and the bond erased, whatever that entailed. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I am not a threat," he said, voice steady despite the tension. "And neither is she. What you call corruption is simply understanding. We humans thrive because we connect. We survive because we feel. We endure because we embrace what you suppress." A ripple of murmurs ran through the council. Some of them leaned forward, curious despite themselves. She watched him, her usual pride giving way to something softer, more vulnerable. "You speak as if emotions are strength," one elder said, its voice like a chorus of bells. "Strength is control, not chaos." He smiled faintly. "Control is an illusion. Real strength comes from choosing to act despite fear, despite uncertainty, despite confusion. Humans understand that better than most species. Emotions do not weaken us, they guide us, inspire us, make us resilient, and yes, make us compassionate." For a moment, the chamber was silent, the weight of his words settling like dust in the air. He glanced at her, and for the first time, she did not look like an alien scholar or a critic. She looked human, in the way that mattered most, capable of feeling, of doubt, of choice. The translator buzzed softly, overwhelmed by subtle signals between them. The bond had intensified, linking their awareness, their emotions, without allowing either to hide. She could feel his certainty, his sincerity, and despite herself, she was drawn closer to it. The council remained rigid, unwilling to yield immediately, but something had shifted. One by one, the rigid expressions softened, curiosity replacing condemnation. They watched the bond, not as a threat now, but as a phenomenon, an anomaly worthy of study rather than immediate destruction. She stepped closer to him, her voice quiet. You are different. I thought your kind could never understand me." He reached out, not touching, but letting her know through presence alone that he was there. We understand more than you think. Not by suppressing, not by controlling, but by daring to connect. You just needed someone willing to learn in a way your rules never allow. Her gaze faltered, conflicted, the alien composure she clung to slipping under the warmth of human determination. The bond pulsed, subtle yet undeniable, a constant reminder of shared awareness and connection. Then, what happens now? She asked. He smiled softly. We survive. We adapt. We learn from each other. That's what humans do. The council deliberated in low murmurs, then slowly, the decisions were made. The bond would not be severed. It could not be. And while protocols would monitor and regulate them, the link was allowed to remain. She looked at him, a half-smile tugging at her lips. You are frustratingly human, she said. And you are impossibly alien, he replied. They laughed quietly, the sound impossible to suppress in the tense chamber. Around them, beings watched, studied, whispered, but the moment was theirs, chaotic and real, bridging worlds that should never have met so intimately. Days passed after the council meeting, but the world felt different. Every glance, every touch, every shared silence carried weight. She still teased him endlessly, mocking his reliance on human habits, his tendency to speak without considering ritual, his fascination with things she considered trivial. He still laughed, still argued, still defied alien customs with irreverent curiosity. And yet, beneath the teasing, beneath the chaos, was understanding. A quiet acknowledgement that despite language, culture, and species differences, they were connected in ways no protocol, no council, no translator could sever. He realized, with a thrill that was part fear and part exhilaration, that she had been right in one sense. Humans might not understand her in the way she expected, but they could understand her in a way she never anticipated. The bond was more than a protocol, more than a curiosity. It was a doorway to something neither of them fully controlled but both embraced: laughter, curiosity, chaos, vulnerability, and something that went beyond the words of any language, a shared human and alien understanding of connection, of life, and of love. As they walked side by side through the corridor, subtle pulses of emotion intertwining in a rhythm neither fully grasped, he felt it clearly: they had crossed a line into territory neither species could have predicted. And yet, somehow, it felt right. She looked at him with a mixture of exasperation and wonder. Perhaps you do understand me, after all. He grinned, matching her step. And perhaps you understand humans more than you'd ever admit. Around them, the station buzzed with life, aliens and humans alike moving through their routines. But in that moment, they existed only in the fragile, chaotic space they had carved for themselves. It was a bond born of accident, of curiosity, of challenge, but also of choice. And as they moved forward, laughing softly at minor missteps, teasing one another, and exchanging glances full of unspoken acknowledgement, he knew one thing with certainty: humans might have been underestimated, their emotions dismissed, their chaos mocked, but in the end, it was precisely that humanity, in all its messy brilliance, that had conquered the impossible. She reached out, finally, in a gesture both deliberate and hesitant. He caught her hand, not in possession, not in dominance, but in partnership. The bond pulsed between them again, stronger, warmer, unmistakably alive. And for the first time, she smiled fully, not with pride, not with superiority, but with understanding. Perhaps, she whispered, voice trembling slightly with emotion she would never fully admit. You were right all along. He squeezed her hand lightly, the connection humming softly under the skin, under the mind, under the boundaries of two very different species. Not right, he said with a grin. Just human. And in that moment, laughter and emotion and curiosity intertwined, echoing through the corridors of the station and the hearts of two beings who had learned to understand one another in a way that no council, no language, no rule could ever predict.